Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joe. Hey, Joe! Yeah, it's working, buddy. What's up, man? Think it just went live tonight. What's going on, dude? Finally get home from work, huh? Got out early. Jesus, man. I'm sorry, dude. It's gotta get better, right? Gotta get better. It's good to see you, though, man. I'm glad you just tuned in. We just killed Duke Nukem, and, well, yeah, I mean, we killed Duke Nukem many times, actually. But, we just, finished our playthrough for the night. We're almost done with the game. And, I thought we beat it, but I didn't know there was the expansion there. With the game, the version I was playing came with the expansion. So we did beat the original game, and now we're playing the expansion. But, just getting ready for our little chill-out reading stream. And, looks great, man. Thank you very much, guys. If you're not aware, the emotes and the channel design that we did, my buddy X-Wing Zero, one of my best friends, Joe, is a graphic designer, and he did all this for me. And it looks great, so I'm really happy with it. The two emotes we have right now, and the third one is coming. It's actually related to this. It's called Storytime. And he's working on it. It's an all original artwork. He's a really cool dude and really good artist. And he has raised my channel's professionalism to the next level, I think. So, and it's showing in the follows and the subscribes and the feedback we're getting from people. So, thank you very much, Joe. Much deserved. And if you know anybody who's looking for Twitch branding, it's something he's new into. But he did a really unique and interesting job here, and he's only going to get better as he goes forward. So, but anyway, guys, no, it's not. It's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of me doing my stupid stuff on camera, and it's a combination of the fantastic community that we have here. Not just of the guys who follow my channel, guys and girls, I should say. Guys, I mean guys in the general sense, but the folks who follow my channel. I like the word folks. I don't use it. I used to use it all the time, and it kind of dropped off. But the folks who follow my channel are an awesome community, and they really welcome everybody who comes in here and take good care of them. So I owe an awful lot of building this community to them. And my two awesome mods who do so much work for me, Vane and Enkek, just bust their butts for absolutely no reward whatsoever. And I don't know why, and I'm just grateful that they do, because I couldn't be anywhere near where I am without the two of them. And you, Joe, for being a big supporter as both a friend and now as my graphic designer and art director, you know. So anyway, that's where we're at. Moose, I didn't get a chance to look at your email yet, but I will. As soon as the stream's over, I left myself a note. But we're getting into the wind down mode now, guys. And getting ready to to read Pawn of the Prophecy, this much dog-eared novel by David Eddings. We are up to chapter 10. And that's probably the only chapter we'll read tonight because we're getting a late start, and I think it's a long chapter. So if you will indulge me, we'll get started. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the darkness became paler as the soft falling snow made indistinct even the arrival of morning. Their seemingly inexhaustible horses pounded on through the glowing light. The sound of their hooves muffled by the snow, now lying fetlock deep on the broad surface of the Great North Road. Garion glanced back once and saw the jumbled tracks of their passage, stretching behind them and already at the hazy gray limit of his vision, beginning to fill with concealing snow. When it was fully light, Mr. Wolf reined in his steaming horse and proceeded at a walk for a time. "How far have we come?" "How far have we come?" he asked Soak. The weasel-faced man who had been shaking the snow out of the folds of his cloak looked around, trying to pick out landmarks in the misty veil of the dropping flakes. 10 leagues, he said, finally. Perhaps a bit more. This is a miserable way to travel, Barrack rumbled, wincing slightly as he shifted his bulk in the saddle. Think of how your horse must feel, Silk grinned at him. How far is it to Kamar? Aunt Paul said. 40 leagues from Meros, Silk told her. We'll need shelter then, she said. We can't gallop 40 leagues without rest, no matter who's behind us. I don't think we'll need to worry about pursuit just now, Wolf said. The Algars would detain Brill and his hirelings, or even Asherak if they try to follow us. At least there's something Algars are good for, Silk said dryly. If I remember correctly, there should be an Imperial hostel about 5 leagues farther to the west, Wolf said. We ought to reach it by noon. Will we be allowed to stay there? Dernick asked doubtfully. I never heard that Talnedrans are noted for hospitality. Talnedrans would sell you anything for a price, Silk said. The hostel would be a good place to stop, even if Brill or Asherak should evade the Algars and follow us there. The Legionnaires won't permit any foolishness within their walls. Why should there be Talnedran soldiers in Sandaria? Garion asked, feeling a brief surge of patriotic resentment at the thought. Wherever the great roads are, you'll find the legions, Silk said. Talnedrans are even better at writing treaties than they are at giving short weight to their customers. Mr. Wolf chuckled. You're inconsistent, Silk, he said. You don't object to their highways, but you dislike their legions. You can't have the one without the other. I never pretended to be consistent, the sharp-nosed man said airily. If we want to reach the questionable comfort of the Imperial hostel by noon, hadn't we better move along? I wouldn't want to deny His Imperial Majesty the opportunity to pick my pocket. All right, Wolf said. Let's ride. And he put his heels into the flanks of his Algar horse, which had already begun to prance impatiently under him. The hostel, when they reached it in the full light of snowy noon, proved to be a series of stout buildings surrounded by an even stouter wall. The legionnaires who manned it were not the same sort of menace the Talnedran merchants Garion had seen before. Unlike the oily men of commerce, these were hard-faced professional fighting men, in burnished breastplates and plumed helmets. They carried themselves proudly, even arrogantly, each bearing the knowledge that the might of all Talnedra was behind him. The food in the dining hall was plain and wholesome, but dreadfully expensive. The tiny sleeping cubicles were scrupulously clean, with hard, narrow beds and thick woolen blankets, and were also expensive. The stables were neat, and they too reached deeply into Mr. Wolf's purse. Garion wondered at the thought of how much their lodging was costing, but Wolf paid for it all with seeming indifference, as if his purse were bottomless. We'll rest here until tomorrow, the white-bearded old man announced when they had finished eating. Maybe it'll snow itself out by morning. I'm not happy with all this plunging blindly through a snowstorm. Too many things can hide in our path in such weather. Garion, who by now was numb with exhaustion, heard these words gratefully as he half-drowsed at the table. The others were sat talking quietly, but he was too tired to listen to what they said. Garion, Aunt Paul said finally, why don't you go to bed? I'm all right, Aunt Paul, he said, rousing himself quickly, mortified once more at being treated like a child. Now, Garion, she said in that infuriating tone he knew so well. It seemed that all his life she had been saying, now, Garion, to him, but he knew better than to argue. He stood up and was surprised to feel that his legs were trembling. Aunt Paul also rose and led him from the dining hall. I can find my way by myself, he objected. Of course, she said. Now come along. After he had crawled into bed in his cubicle, she pulled his blankets up firmly around his neck. Stay covered, she said. I don't want you taking cold. She laid her cool hand briefly on his forehead, as she had done when he was a small child. Excuse me. Stop playing Duke Nukem all of a sudden. I'm yawning, guys. Yes, Garion. Who are my parents? I mean, what were their names? She looked at him gravely. We can talk about that later, she said. I want to know, he said stubbornly. All right. Your father's name was Garen. Your mother's was Ildera. Garion thought about that. The names don't sound Sandarian, he said finally. They're not, Aunt Paul said. Why was that? It's a very long story, she said, and you're much too tired to hear it just now. On a sudden impulse, he reached out and touched the white lock at her brow with the mark on the palm of his right hand. As it had sometimes happened before, a window seemed to open in his mind at the tingling touch. But this time that window opened on something much more serious. There was anger, and a single face. A face that was strangely like Mr. Wolf's, but was not his face. And all the towering fury in the world was directed at that face. Aunt Poll moved her head away. I've asked you not to do that, Garyon, she said, her tone very matter-of-fact. You're not ready for it yet. You're going to have to tell me what it is someday, he said. Perhaps, she said, but not now. Close your eyes and go to sleep. And then, as if that command had somehow dissolved his will, he fell immediately into a deep, untroubled sleep. I'm so jealous. Don't forget to check out Storytime, guys, which is happening right the fuck now. Sometimes the timers annoy me. By the next morning, it had stopped snowing. The world outside the walls of the Imperial Hostel was mantled in thick, unbroken white, and the air was filmy, the kind of damp haze that was almost, but not quite, fog. Misty Sandaria, Silk said ironically at breakfast. Sometimes I'm amazed that the entire kingdom doesn't just rust shut. They traveled all day at a mile-eating canter, and that night there was another Imperial hostel almost identical to the one they had left that morning. So closely identical, in fact, that it almost seemed to Garyon that they had ridden all day and merely arrived back where they had started. He commented on that to Silk as they were putting their horses in the stable. Talnedrins are nothing if not predictable, Silk said. All their hostels are exactly the same. You can find these same buildings in Drasnia, Algaria, Arendia, and any place else their great roads go. It's their one weakness, this lack of imagination. Don't they get tired of doing the same thing over and over again? It makes them feel comfortable, I guess, Silk laughed. Let's go see about supper. It snowed again the following day, but by noon, Garyon caught a scent other than that faintly dusty older snow always seemed to have. Even as he had done when he approached Irene, he began to smell the sea, and he knew their journey was almost at an end. Kamar, the largest city in Sandaria and the major seaport of the north, was a sprawling place which had existed at the mouth of the greater Kamar River since antiquity. It was the natural western terminus of the Great North Road, which stretched to Baktor and Drasnia, and the equally natural northern end of the Great West Road, which reached down across Arendia into Talnedra and the imperial capital at Tal Hanith. With some accuracy, it could be said that all roads ended at Kamar. Late on a chill, snowy afternoon, they yawned repeatedly, and made everybody else yawn too. Late on a chill, snowy afternoon, they rode down a gradual hill toward the city. Some distance from the gate, Aunt Poll stopped her horse. Since we're no longer posing as vagabonds, she announced, I see no further need for selecting the most disreputable inns, do you? I hadn't really thought about it, Mr. Wolf said. Well, I have, she said. I've had more than enough of wayside hostels and seedy village inns. I need a bath, a clean bed, and some decent food. If you don't mind, I'll choose our lodgings this time. Of course, Poll, Wolf said mildly. Whatever you say. Very well, then, she said, and rode on toward the city gate with the rest of them trailing behind her. What's your business at Kamar? One of the fur-mantled guards at the broad gate asked rather rudely. Aunt Poll threw back her hood and fixed the man with a steely gaze. I am the Duchess of Erat, she announced in ringing tones. These are my retainers, and my business in Kamar is my own affair. The guard blinked and then bowed respectfully. Forgive me, Your Grace, he said. I didn't intend to give offense. Indeed, Aunt Poll said, her tone still cold and her gaze still dangerous. I did not recognize Your Grace, the poor man floundered, squirming under that imperious stare. May I offer you any assistance? I hardly think so, Aunt Paul said, looking at him up and down. Which is the finest inn in Kamar? That would be the Lion, my lady. And, she said impatiently. And what, my lady? The man said, confused by her question. Where is it? She demanded. Don't stand there gaping like a dolt. Speak up. It lies beyond the custom houses, the guard replied, flushing at her words. Follow this street until you reach Custom Square. Anyone there can direct you to the Lion. Aunt Poll pulled her hood back up. Give the fellow something, she said over her shoulder, and rode on into the city without a backwards glance. Why, thanks, the guard said as Wolf leaned down to hand him a small coin. Oh, boy. I must admit, I haven't heard of the Duchess of Erat before. You're a fortunate man, Wolf said. She's a great beauty, the man said admiringly. It has a temper to match, Wolf told him. I noticed that, the guard said. We noticed you noticing, Silk told him slyly. They nudged their horses and caught up with Aunt Poll. The Duchess of Erat? Silk asked mildly. The fellow's manner irritated me, Aunt Poll said loftily, and I am tired of putting on a poor face in front of strangers. At Custom Square, Silk accosted a busy-looking merchant trudging across the snow-covered paving. You, fellow, he said in the most insulting way possible, pulling his horse directly in front of the startled merchant. My mistress, the Duchess of Erat, requires directions to an inn called the Lion. Be so good as to provide them. The merchant blinked, his face flushing at the rat-faced man's tone. Up that street, he said shortly, pointing. Some goodly way. It'll be on your left. There's a sign of a lion at the front. Silk sniffed ungraciously, tossed a few coins into the snow at the man's feet, and whirled his horse in a grand manner. The merchant, Garion noted, looked outraged, but he did grope in the snow for the coins Silk had thrown. I doubt any of these people will quickly forget our passage, Wolf said sourly when they were some ways up the street. They'll remember the passage of an arrogant noblewoman, Silk said. This is as good a disguise as any we've tried. When they arrived at the inn, Aunt Poll commanded not just the usual sleeping chambers, but an entire apartment. My chamberlain there will pay you, she said to the innkeeper, indicating Mr. Wolf. Our baggage horses are some days behind with the rest of my servants, so I'll require the services of a dressmaker and a maid. See to it. And she turned and swept imperially up the long staircase that led to her apartment, following the servant, who scurried ahead to show her the way. The Duchess has a commanding presence, doesn't she? The innkeeper ventured as Wolf began counting out coins. She has indeed, Wolf agreed. I've discovered the wisdom of not countering her wishes. I'll be guided by you, then, the innkeeper assured him. My youngest daughter is a serviceable girl. I'll dispatch her to serve as the Grace's maid. Many thanks, friend, Silk told him. Our lady becomes most irritable when things she desires are delayed, and we're the ones who suffer most from her displeasure. They trooped up the stairs into the apartments Aunt Poll had taken and stepped into the main sitting room, a splendid chamber, far richer than any Garion had seen before. The walls were covered by tapestries with intricate pictures woven into the fabric. A wealth of candles, real wax instead of smoking tallow, gleamed in sconces on the walls, and in a massive candelabra on the polished table. A good warm fire danced merrily on the hearth, and a large carpet of curious design lay on the floor. Toast. Aunt Poll was standing before the fire, warming her hands. Isn't this better than some shabby wharf-side inn reeking of fish and unwashed sailors? She asked. If the Duchess of Erat will forgive my saying so, Wolf said somewhat tartly, this is hardly the way to escape notice, and the cost of these lodgings would feed a legion for a week. Don't grow parsimonious in your dotage, old Wolf, she replied. No one takes a spoiled noblewoman seriously, and your wagons weren't able to keep that disgusting Brill from finding us. This guise is at least comfortable, and it permits us to move more rapidly. Wolf grunted. I only hope we won't regret all this, he said. Stop grumbling, old man. Have it your way, Paul, he sighed. I intend to, she said. How are we to behave, Mistress Paul? Dernick asked hesitantly. Her sudden regal manner had obviously confused him. I'm not familiar with the ways of the gentry. It's quite simple, Dernick, she said. She eyed him up and down, noting his plain, dependable face and his solid competence. How would you like to be the chief groom to the Duchess of Erat, and master of her stables? Dernick laughed uncomfortably. Noble titles for work I've done all my life, he said. I could manage the work easily enough, but the titles might grow a bit heavy. You'll do splendidly, friend Dernick, Sook assured him. That honest face of yours makes people believe anything you choose to tell them. If I had a face like yours, I could steal half the world. He turned to Aunt Paul. And what role am I to play, my lady? You will be my reeve, she said. The thievery usually associated with the position should suit you. Silk bowed ironically. And I? Barrack said, grinning openly. My man-at-arms, she said. I doubt that any would believe you to be a dancing master. Just stand around looking dangerous. What about me, Aunt Paul? Garion asked. What do I do? You can be my page. What does a page do? You fetch things for me. I've always done that. Is that what it's called? Don't be impertinent. You'll also answer doors and announce visitors, and when I'm melancholy, you may sing to me. Sing? He said incredulously. Me? It's customary. You wouldn't make me do that, would you, Aunt Paul? Your Grace, she corrected. You won't be very gracious if you have to listen to me sing, he warned. My voice isn't very good. Oh, you'll do just fine, dear. And I have already appointed your Grace's chamberlain, Wolf said. My chief steward, she told him. Manager of my estates and keeper of my purse. Somehow I knew that would be part of it. There was a timid rap at the door. See who that is, Garion, Aunt Paul said. When he opened the door, Garion found a young girl with light brown hair and a sober dress, and starched apron and cap standing outside. She had very large brown eyes and looked at him apprehensively. Yes? He asked. I've been sent to wait upon the Duchess, he said in a low voice. Your maid has arrived, Your Grace, Garion announced. Oh, splendid, Aunt Paul said. Come in, child. The girl entered the room. What a pretty thing you are, Aunt Paul said. Thank you, my lady, the girl answered, with a brief curtsy and a rosy blush. And what is your name? I am called Dania, my lady. A lovely name, Aunt Paul said. Now to important matters. Is there a bath on the premises? It was still snowing in the next morning. The roofs of the nearby houses were piled high with white. The narrow streets were deep with it. I think we're close to the end of our search, Mr. Wolf said as he stared intently out through the rippled glass of the window into the room with the tapestries. It's unlikely that the one we're after would stand Kama for long, Silk said. Very unlikely, Wolf agreed. But once we've found his trail, we'll be able to move much more rapidly. Let's go into the city and see if I'm right. Just checking, guys. It's quite a long chapter. Alright, I can do that. After Mr. Wolf and Silk had left, Garion sat for a while talking with Dania, who seemed to be about his own age. Although she was not quite as pretty as Zubret, Garion found her soft voice and huge brown eyes extremely attractive. Things were going along well between them until Aunt Paul's dressmaker arrived, and Dania's presence was required in the chamber where the Duchess of Erat was being fitted for her new gowns. Since Dernick, obviously ill at ease in the luxurious surroundings of their chambers, had adjourned to the stables after breakfast, Garion was left in the company of the giant Barrack, who worked patiently with a small stone, polishing a nick out of the edge of his sword, a memento of the skirmish in Muros. Garion had never been wholly comfortable with the huge red-bearded man. Barrack spoke rarely, and there seemed to be a kind of hulking menace about him. So it was that Garion spent the morning examining the tapestries of the walls of the sitting room. tapestries depicted knights in full armor, and castles on hilltops, and strangely angular-looking maidens moping about in gardens. "Horrendish," Varric said directly behind him. Garion jumped. The huge man had moved up so quietly that Garion had not heard him. "How can you tell?" Garion asked politely. "The Arryns have a fondness for tapestry," Varric grumbled. "And the weaving of pictures occupies their women while the men are off denting each other's armor." "Do they really wear all that?" Garion asked, pointing at the heavily armored knight pictured in the tapestry. "Oh yes," Varric laughed. "That and more. Even their horses wear armor. It's a silly way to make war." Garion scuffed his shoe on the carpet. "Is this Horrendish too?" he asked. Varric shook his head. "Malorian," he said. "How did it get all the way here from Meloria?" Garion asked. "I've heard that Meloria's all the way on the other side of the world." "It's a goodly way off," Varric agreed, "but a merchant would go twice as far to make a profit. Such goods as the commonly move along the north caravan route out of Garog Nadrak to Bokdor. Melorian carpets are prized by the wealthy. I don't much care for them myself, since I'm not fond of anything that has to do with Angarax." Yeah. "How many kinds of Angarax are there?" Garion asked. "I know there are Murgos and Thuls, but I've heard stories about the Battle of Omimbre and all. But I don't know much about them, really." "There are 5 tribes of them," Varric said, sitting back down and resuming his polishing. "Murgos and Thuls, Nadraks and Melorians, and of course, the Grallams. They live in the 4 kingdoms of the east: Meloria, Garag Nadrak, Mishrak Akthul, and Cathal Murgos." "Where do the Grallams live?" "They have no special place," Varric replied grimly. "The Grallams are the priests of Torak One-Eye and are everywhere in the lands of the Angarax. They're the ones who perform the sacrifices to Torak. Grallam knives have spilled more Angarak blood than a dozen Vomimbres." Garion shuddered. "Why should Torak take such pleasure in the slaughter of his own people?" he asked. "Who can say?" Varric shrugged. "He's a twisted and evil god. Some believe that he was made mad when he used the Orb of Aldor to crack the world, and the orb repaid him by burning out his eye and consuming his hand." "How could the world be cracked?" Garion asked. "I've never understood that part of the story." "The power of the Orb of Aldor is such that it can accomplish anything," Varric told him. "When Torak raised it, the earth was split apart by its power, and the seas came in to drown the land. The story's very old, but I think that it's probably true." "Where is the Orb of Aldor now?" Garion asked suddenly. Varric looked at him, his eyes icy blue and his face thoughtful, but he didn't say anything. "You know what I want to Do you know what I think?" Garion said in a sudden impulse. "I think it's the Orb of Aldor that's been stolen. I think it's the orb that Mr. Wolf is trying to find." "And I think it would be better if you didn't think so much about such things," Varric warned. "But I want to know," Garion protested, his curiosity driving him even in the face of Varric's words and the warning voice in his mind. "Everyone treats me like an ignorant boy. All I do is tag along with no idea what we're doing. Who's Mr. Wolf, anyway? Why did the Algars behave the way they did when they saw him? How can he follow something he can't see? Please tell me, Varric." "Not I," Varric laughed. "Your aunt would pull out my beard whisker by whisker if I made that mistake." "You're not afraid of her, are you?" "Any man with good sense is afraid of her," Varric said, rising and sliding his sword into its sheath. "Aunt Poll?" Garion said incredulously. "Aren't you afraid of her?" Varric asked pointedly. "No," Garion said, and then realized that was not precisely true. "Well, not really afraid, it's more—" He left it hanging, not knowing exactly how to explain it. "Exactly," Varric said. "And I'm no more foolhardy than you, my boy. You're too full of questions, and I'd be far wiser not to answer. If you want to know about these things, you'll have to ask your aunt." "She won't tell me," Garion said glumly. "She won't tell me anything. She won't even tell me about my parents. Not really." Varric frowned. "That's strange," she said. "I don't think they were Sendars," Garion said. "Their names weren't Sendarian, and Silk says that I'm not a Sendar. At least I don't look like one." Varric looked at him closely. "No," he said finally. "Now that you mention it, you don't. You look more like a Revan than anything else, but not quite that either." "Is Aunt Poll a Revan?" Barrick's eyes narrowed slightly. I think we're getting to some more of those questions I hadn't better answer, he said. I'm gonna find out someday. Yeah, but not today, Barrick said. Come along, I need some exercise. Let's go out into the inn yard and I'll teach you how to use a sword. Me? Garion said, all his curiosity suddenly melting away in the excitement of that thought. You're at an age where you should begin to learn, Barrick said. The occasion may someday arise when it'll be a useful thing for you to know. Late that afternoon, when Garion's arm had begun to ache from the effort of swinging Barrick's heavy sword, and the whole idea of learning the skills of a warrior had become a great deal less exciting, Mr. Wolf and Silk returned. Their clothes were wet from the snow through which they had trudged all day, but Wolf's eyes were bright, and his face had a curiously exultant expression as he led them all back up the stairs to the sitting room. Ask your aunt to join us, he told Garion as he removed his sodden mantle and stepped to the fire to warm himself. Garion sensed quickly that this was not the time for questions. He hurried to the polished door where Aunt Poll had been closeted with her dressmaker all day and rapped. What is it? Her voice came from inside. That is, your chamberlain has returned, my lady, Garion said, remembering at the last moment that she was not alone. He requests a word with you. Oh, very well, she said. After a minute she came out, firmly closing the door behind her. Garion gasped. The rich blue velvet gown she wore made her so magnificent that she quite took his breath away. He stared at her in helpless admiration. Where is he? She asked. Don't stand and gape, Garion. It's not polite. Polite. You're beautiful, Aunt Poll, he blurted. Yes, dear, she said, patting his cheek. I know. Now, where's the old wolf? In the room with the tapestries, Garion said, still unable to take his eyes from her. Come along, then, she said, and swept down the short hall to the sitting room. They entered to find the others all standing by the fireplace. Well, she asked. Wolf looked up at her, his eyes still bright. Ah, excellent choice, Poll, he said admiringly. Blue always has been your best color. Do you like it? She asked, holding out her arms and turning almost girlishly, so they all might see how fine she looked. I hope it pleases you, old man, because it's costing you a great deal of money. Wolf laughed. I was almost certain it would, he said. The effect of Aunt Poll's gown on Dernick was painfully obvious. The poor man's eyes literally bulged, and his face turned alternatively very pale and then very red, and then finally settled into an expression of such hopelessness that Garion was touched to the quick by it. Silk and Barrick in curious unison both bowed deeply and wordlessly to Aunt Poll, and her eyes sparkled at their silent tribute. It's been here, Wolf announced seriously. You certain? Aunt Poll demanded. He nodded. I could feel the memory of its passage in the very stones. Did it come by sea? She asked. No. He probably came ashore with it in some secluded cove up the coast and then traveled here by land. And took ship again? I doubt that. I know him well. He's not comfortable on the sea. Besides which, Barrick said, one word to King Angheg of Carrick would have put 100 warships on his trail. No one can hide on the sea from the ships of Cherrick, and he knows that. You're right, Wolf agreed. I think he'll avoid the domains of the Alorns. That's probably why he chose not to pass along the north road through Elgaria and Drasnia. The spirit of Balar is strong in the kingdoms of the Alorns, and not even this thief is bold enough to risk a confrontation with the bear god. Which leaves us Erendia, Silk said, or the land of the Elgos. Erendia, I think, Wolf said. The wrath of Ul is even more fearsome than that of Balar. Forgive me, Dernick said, his eyes still on Aunt Poll. This is most confusing. I never heard just exactly who this thief is. I'm sorry, gentle Dernick, Wolf said. It's not a good idea to speak his name. He has certain powers which might make it possible for him to know our every move if we alert him to our location, and he can hear his name spoken 1,000 leagues away. A sorcerer? Dernick asked unbelievingly. The word isn't the one I'd choose, Wolf said. It's a term used by men who don't understand that particular art. Instead, let's call him thief. though there are a few other names I might call him which are far less kindly. Can we be certain he'll make for the kingdom of the Angarax? Silk asked, frowning. If that's the case, wouldn't it be quicker to take a ship directly to Tal Haneth and pick up his trail by the southern caravan route into Cathal Murgos? Wolf shook his head. Better to stay with this trail now that we found it. We don't know what he intends. Maybe he wants to keep the thing he's stolen for himself, rather than deliver it over to the Grollems. He might even seek sanctuary in Nissa. He couldn't do that without the connivance of Salmarissa, Aunt Paul said. It wouldn't be the first time that the Queen of Serpent People has tampered with things that are none of her concern, Wolf pointed out. If that turns out to be true, Aunt Paul said grimly, I think I'll give myself the leisure to deal with the snake woman permanently. It's too early to know, Wolf said. Tomorrow we'll buy provisions and ferry across the river to Erendia. I'll take up the trail there. For the time being, all we can do is follow the trail. Once we know for certain where it leads, we'll be able to consider our alternatives. From the evening-darkened inn-yard outside, there came the sudden sound of many horses. Barrack stepped quickly to the window, glanced out. Excuse me. Soldiers, he said shortly. Yeah, Silk said, also hurrying to the window. They appear to be from one of the king's regiments, Barrack said. They won't be interested in us, Aunt Paul said. Unless they aren't what they seem, Silk said. Uniforms of one kind or another aren't that difficult to come by. They aren't Murgos, Barrack said. I'd recognize Murgos. Brill isn't a Murgo either, Silk said, staring down into the inn-yard. See if you can hear what they say, Wolf instructed. Barrack carefully opened one of the windows a crack, and the candles all flickered in the gust of icy wind. In the yard below, the captain of the soldiers was speaking with the innkeeper. He's a man of somewhat more than medium height, with white hair and a short white beard. He may be traveling with some others. There is such a one here, Your Honor, the innkeeper said dubiously. But I'm sure he isn't the one you seek. This one is chief steward to the Duchess of Urat, who honors my inn with her presence. The Duchess of where? The captain asked sharply. Of Urat, the innkeeper replied. A most noble lady of great beauty and a commanding presence. I wonder if I might have a word with her grace, the captain said, climbing down from his horse. I'll ask her if she will receive Your Honor, the innkeeper replied. Barrack closed the window. I'll deal with this meddlesome captain, he said firmly. No, Wolf said. He's got too many soldiers with him, and if they are who they seem to be, they're good men who haven't done us any harm. There's the back stairs, Silk suggested. We could be 3 streets away before he reached our door. And if he stationed soldiers at the back of the inn, Aunt Paul suggested, what then? Since he's coming to speak with the Duchess of Urat, why don't we let the Duchess deal with him? What have you got in mind? Wolf asked. If the rest of you stay out of sight, I'll speak with him, she said. I should be able to put him off until morning. We can be across the river into Erendia before he comes back. Oh yeah, just one chapter tonight, guys. Perhaps, Wolf said, but this captain sounds like a definitely just one chapter tonight, guys. But this captain sounds like a determined man. I've dealt with determined men before, she said. We'll have to decide quickly, Silk said from the door. He's on the stairs right now. We'll try it your way, Paul, Wolf said, opening the door to the next chamber. Garion, Aunt Paul said, you stay here. A duchess would not be unattended. Wolf and the others quickly left the room. What do you want me to do, Aunt Paul? Garion whispered. Just remember that you're my page, dear, she said, seating herself in a large chair near the center of the room and carefully arranging the folds of her gown. Stand near my chair and try to look attentive. I'll take care of the rest. Yes, my lady, Garion said. The captain, when he arrived behind the innkeeper's knock, proved to be a tall, sober-looking man with penetrating gray eyes. Garion tried his best to sound officious, requesting the soldier's name, and then turned to Aunt Paul. There's a Captain Brendick here to see you, Your Grace, he announced. He says it's a matter of importance. Aunt Paul looked at him for a moment as if considering the request. "Oh, very well," she said finally. "Show him in." Captain Brendig stepped into the room and the innkeeper left hurriedly. "Your Grace," the captain said, bowing deferentially to Aunt Paul. "What is it, Captain?" she demanded. "I would not trouble your Grace if my mission were not of such urgency," Brendig apologized. "My orders are directly from the king himself, and you of all people will know that we must defer to his wishes." "I suppose I can spare a few moments for the king's business," she said. "There's a certain man the king wishes to have apprehended," Brendig said. "An elderly man with white hair and a beard. I'm informed that you have such a one among your servants." "Is the man a criminal?" she said. "The king didn't say so, your Grace," he told her. "I was only told that the man was to be seized and delivered to the palace at Sendar, and all who were with him as well." "I'm seldom at court," Aunt Paul said. "It's most unlikely that any of my servants would be of such interest to the king." "Your Grace," Brendig said delicately, "in addition to my duties in one of the king's own regiments, I also have the honor to hold a baronetcy. I have been at court all my life, and I must confess that I've never seen you there. A lady of your striking appearance would not be soon forgotten." Aunt Paul inclined her head slightly in acknowledgment of the compliment. "I suppose I should have guessed, my Lord Brendig. Your manners are not those of a common soldier." "Moreover, your Grace," he continued, "I'm familiar with all the holdings of the kingdom. If I'm not mistaken, the district of Erat is an earldom, and the Earl of Erat is a short, stout man. My great-uncle, incidentally. There has been no duchy in that part of Sandaria since the kingdom was under the dominion of the Wassite Eddings." And Paul fixed him with an icy stare. "My lady," Brendig said almost apologetically, "the Wassite Eddings were exterminated by their Asturian cousins in the last years of the third millennium. There has been no Wassite nobility for over 2,000 years." "I thank you for the history lesson, my lord," and Paul said coldly. "All of that, however, is hardly the issue, is it?" Brendig continued. "I am bidden by my king to seek out the man of whom I spoke. Upon your honor, lady, you know such a man." The question hung in the air between them, and Garion, knowing in sudden panic that they were caught, almost shouted for Barrack. Then the door to the next chamber opened, and Mr. Wolfe stepped into the room. "There's no need to continue with this," he said. "I'm the one you're looking for. What does Fulrak of Sandaria want with me?" Brendig looked at him without seeming surprise. "His Majesty did not see fit to take me into his confidence," he said. "He will explain it himself, I have no doubt, as soon as we reach the palace at Sendar." "The sooner the better, then," Wolfe said. "When do we leave?" "We depart for Sendar directly after breakfast in the morning," Brendig said. "I will accept your word that none of you will attempt to leave this inn during the night. I prefer not to subject the Duchess of Erat to the indignity of confinement at the local barracks. The cells there are most uncomfortable, I'm told." "You have my word," Mr. Wolfe said. "Thank you," Brendig said, bowing slightly. "I must also advise you that I am obliged to post guards about this inn. For your protection, of course." "Your solicitude overwhelms us, my lord," Aunt Paul said dryly. "Your servant, my lady," Brendig said with a formal bow, and then he turned and left the room. The polished door was only wood. Garion knew that, but as it closed behind the departing Brendig, it seemed to have that dreadful, final clang of the door to a dungeon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was quite a long chapter. And though not much happened, a lot kind of happened. I am going to have to call it there. I appreciate your attendance this evening. If you're new to the stream, we read every night at approximately 1 a.m., sometimes a few minutes later. And, good night, Jared, and night, Joe. We will be continuing Pawn of the Prophecy tomorrow night at about 1 a.m. This is a new thing we're doing, and I hope you guys like it. Hey, night, Vane. Night, Mikios. But other than that, I will plan to be on tomorrow night at 8 p.m. to play Roller Coaster Tycoon for a little while, until we lead up to Pawn of the Prophecy at the end of the night. Hey, Moose. My pleasure. Thank you. That's pretty much all I have to say. Once again, my name is Joe, and this has been Game Life Game Reads, Pawn of the Prophecy. Not Porn of the Prophecy, as Nana would have me say. By David Eddings. Be back tomorrow night at 8, like I said, for Roller Coaster Tycoon, and I hope you have a good night. Remember, guys, life is what happens in between games. So go live your life, be kind to each other, and live your life with love and compassion. I will see you next game. Thank you very much. It's been, as always, my pleasure. And I can't find my OBS. There it is. Goodbye.